Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I am your host, Joe Trinzi. Super quick housekeeping. We have two more coaches workshops up. On Friday the 17th, we got Dan, Brendan, and Laura Lee Smith from Lewis talking about preseason prep. That's a highly relevant topic this year, as preseason promises to be uniquely challenging for volleyball coaches, at least American volleyball coaches, this fall. So they're offering some thoughts just on general principles, but then also specific for this year. And then Saturday, 25th, we got Marv Dunphy coming on. It's going to be our last one of the season. So last one of the season, last one of the summer. So what better guy to end with than Marv on Saturday, 25th. So you can go on scoutvb.com, check those out, or email me, joe.trinzi@gmail.com, if you're interested in those coaches workshops. And, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Volleycast if you're interested in kind of seeing some more updates. I don't post a ton on there, mostly just try to keep them just relevant updates or just some things from how I'm preparing for some of these workshops or film that I'm breaking down or stuff like that. Hopefully you find that content useful. We got an attendee, a workshop attendee, a participant. I need to think of a good name for what I call all of you. Listeners just doesn't seem quite right. But just other coaches, I guess. Question. And this is a college coach. Will keep sort of his identity, I guess, a little hidden, because I don't want to just say like, oh, this is what this school is trying to do. But this guy is a Division I college coach. He starts off his email. First, I just want to thank you for putting all these webinars together. I can only imagine how much time and prep it takes, but I really appreciate all of the effort. Well, thank you. I think it's awesome that you can bring these great volleyball minds together so we can all learn something from them. I think the whole volleyball community benefits when we can all discuss different ideas and make you question your own philosophies from time to time. Well, so do I. That's why I'm doing these. So glad a lot of you are getting value out of these. So yeah, that's the whole purpose. So he goes on to ask a really good question. So basically just going to kind of read his whole question in full. He says, we tried to evaluate out-of-system swings. I know that you briefly mentioned creation percentage last week, and I just wanted to pick your brain a little more on some of these concepts. And he's going to reference a couple of the coaching workshops that we've done. You can look them up. Going back a couple of weeks ago, one of the concepts Kirsten Bernthal Booth mentioned was out-of-system attacking. Creighton looks to set the ball 4 feet inside and on the net. I think this is a newer philosophy and one that we certainly subscribe to at our program. She also mentioned taking rips, which at a brief glance, Creighton is actually more likely to take a hard-driven swing in high ball situations than an in-system situation. I think other programs like Pitt share a similar philosophy. And my side note here, Dan Fisher did talk about that when we had him, when I had him on in a coaching workshop earlier this summer. He did talk about that going on. However, some programs like Minnesota are almost the total inverse. Minnesota is 2 to 2.5 times more likely to roll shot in these situations, which helps them mitigate errors, but it also drives down their kill rate. Obviously, both philosophies have proven to work at extremely high levels. Have you developed a system of scoring out-of-system swings or the pressure it creates? And he goes on to reference a specific player from a program. He says, for example, this player rolls 27% of high ball opportunities, so her efficiency and kill percentage aren't that high, but what is the cost benefit of that shot? Is she still putting enough pressure on an opponent's transition game? Have you been able to put this score in a human scale? I really like the way that you phrased it, making stats easily digestible to players. Perhaps it's better to just place a way higher premium on kill percentage. So wow, this question in and of itself that's just kind of worthy of just sharing just that question, because the way that this coach is thinking about the game, I think is thinking, he's thinking about it at a really high level, and this coach's program is competing at a really high level. Okay, so it makes sense. You got smart coaches who are competing, on NCAA tournament and potential Final Four teams. Okay, so just the way that coach is thinking about it, I really like a lot of these different things. I think kind of hit the nail on the head. And to address this question, I'm going to just back up just a little bit. I think American volleyball was really influenced by the 2008 Olympic Games. To the best that I can tell, that was the most successful Olympic Games any country has ever had in volleyball. We won 3 golds and a silver. We won both beach golds and the men's indoor gold and silver on the women's indoor. And I think this also, a few things happened because this also coincided with a time when women's volleyball was really going to start outpacing men's volleyball in terms of money and prestige in the United States. This sort of 2008 time 12 years ago, if you look at that, a lot of coaches start coming over from the men's side to the women's side. And it also becomes increasingly clear that the money and the prestige is going to be on the women's side. If you look at, I don't know what average salaries were, say maybe in the Big Ten in 2005, for example. And if you look at them now, I mean, I'm sure, I bet they've doubled, maybe even tripled the coaching salaries on that. SEC volleyball has exploded, all that stuff. So that there's a lot of going over from the men's to the women's side. Also, the 2008 women's coach at that time was Lang Ping, obviously legendary Chinese coach Lang Ping. But I think the fact that she was Chinese was maybe a little bit of a barrier for her system or style maybe being adopted by American volleyball as a whole. That I don't think was necessarily her mission as a coach. And I think that was just a little bit of a barrier. Whereas Hugh McCutcheon, being the coach of the men's team, 2008, obviously is a little maybe more accessible. And, he's done gold medal squared clinics. I think he's done our coaching. He's been out there doing coaching clinics and kind of talking about that kind of stuff. And so Hugh McCutcheon comes over from the men's side after 2008 to coach the women's national team from 2009 through the 2012 Olympics, eventually winning a silver medal, and goes on to coach at University of Minnesota. So I think that that 2008 Olympics and that men's team was a pretty iconic team. I think one of the more iconic teams in USA volleyball history, really. And their final match beating the Brazilians in the finals. It's an incredible Brazilian team with just having that match is just awesome. Just an incredible mixture of veteran players at the top of their game with a couple of young players in that who were kind of just hitting their peaks. You have a young Murillo in that on the Brazilian side. You have peak, you got Dante there. You just got amazing match. But I think it's a more conservative style. I'm not saying that it's an insult. Sometimes when you say aggressive is kind of assumed to be a compliment, I think sometimes to athletes, and conservative is maybe assumed to be an insult. So if there was another way I could say it, it was both those teams are incredibly precise technically, just super high level of technical execution. A lot of the read blocking, just the passing, the defense, and they limited errors. I think if you just look at it, they hitting errors. You see a fair amount of serving errors in that match, but you just don't see a lot of unforced hitting errors in that match. And not a super high rate of getting blocked. I mean, certainly there's plenty of stuff blocks, but there's a little bit more of a context of making hitters play. Ben Josephs and I touched on this a little bit in his session. There's a little bit of almost like this meme of setters in the front row, tip the D-ball hitter down to the ground, go triple block the outside hitter, who's then going to tip your D-ball hitter down to the ground, and then they're going to go triple block your outside hitter, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay, that's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. But I think both those teams had a little bit more of a tactical style. And I think that match was really influential. And I think certainly when we were when I was on the USA staff, I came over after the London Olympics full-time in 2013. So now Karch, who was Hugh's assistant with the women's team in 2012, becomes the head coach. And I think we definitely had a philosophy of sort of making them playing smart, limiting errors, winning rallies in transition, know when you have the set to score, know when you have the set where you have to, make a good continue, take out their setter, tip it to a spot that's going to affect them in transition, make your transition block easier to set up, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a lot of value to that. And as his coach mentioned, there's some really strong teams that are playing that way. I think if you just sort of look broadly at a Final Four, Elite Eight type teams that, Minnesota, as coach mentioned, definitely a more low error, a little more conservative style. If you also look at Louisville, they would have fit that profile. And if you look at, some of the more aggressive teams, this coach talked about Creighton, he talked about Pitt. I would put Baylor in that context as well. If you looked at them, they were had a high, like the kill percentage was high, but also like getting blocked a little bit more and some stuff like that. So, okay, you can be successful both ways. And so how do you like measure it? So you have like kind of a philosophy. How do you measure what's really effective? It's a complicated question. There's a few different ways, coaches measure this stuff. You got kill percentage, you got hitting efficiency. So kills minus blocks and errors over total attempts. You got these other sort of sub values like hitting effectiveness or hitting efficacy, I believe is how Volleymetrics has this additional stat of hitting efficacy. And these are sort of ways to like kind of analyze what the continues do, or the zeros. So they're not kills, they're not errors, they're not blocks. So I'll call those continues. And I'll call kills, errors, and blocks, call them terminal outcomes. So you have terminal outcomes and then you have your continues. How do you measure the values of those? How do you evaluate a recycle? This is a really popular term right now, especially in men's volleyball over maybe the past 5 years or so, is that ability to recycle. Men's teams increasingly are looking for opportunities when it's a real out of system ball to set it tight, try to tap it in the block, cover their own hitter, and then recycle and then get a better swing. In terms of hitting efficiency, that's a 0. It's not a kill, it's a 0. But it could be argued that in some situations, that's a positive play. It could be argued in some situations, it's not a positive play. If you're one-on-one and you end up recycling, that's not good. There's some like more qualitative measure, percentage of balls that you hit hard, percentage of balls that you hit hard past the block, percentage of balls, things like that, or in rhythm swings. That's just something that I've heard Kevin Hambley, first at Illinois, now at Stanford, talk about a lot, is the value of being in rhythm. So how often is the hitter in rhythm? Being maybe even more important than whether the pass was good or bad, but is the hitter in rhythm or out of rhythm? So obviously there's the setters involved in that too. And there's some ways you can kind of like chop them up. You kind of have like this broad in-system versus out-of-system category. You have first ball versus transition. You can almost make that like a 2x2 matrix. So like there's 4 situations. You have like first ball in system and transition in system, and first ball out of system and transition out of system, if you want to like really chop that up. And there's also like there's a difference between like medium situations and then like true out of system situations. And I think especially certain teams, they strive to make more of those medium situations be in system situations. You look at teams that are really trying to go fast, even as their setter comes off the net 10, 12 feet. Stanford was a team that continued to run pretty fast tempo, even as they were on the move. That's certainly something to look at. Minnesota definitely was a team that tried to be like sort of turn the out of system into in system, or turn the medium into in system. But you do have a difference, I think, between those medium situations, passes on the 10, 12-foot line, something like that, versus like true high ball situations, the setter's bump setting. You have a non-setter setting and stuff like that, where you're true high ball situations. And so these are all kind of different ways how you're going to chop it up. Something that I used to look at, I was really interested in tracking this at USA. I don't know if I ever came to any great value other than just I don't know if it ever really got to the court by the time I was looking at something. Was like efficiency on tough swings. So these were out of system balls in perfect sets against at least 2 blockers. What was your efficiency on tough swings? Something I also looked at was sort of like a better the ball situation. So this was sort of my attempt to say, in what situations are certain types of zeros okay? So like, say it's a bad pass and it's a tight set and there's 2 or 3 blockers up. Well, that recycle is a positive play in that situation. But if it's a perfect pass and you're one-on-one and they soft block you and you have a covered, like essentially unintentional recycle, that's a negative play. So I sort of looked at try to look at what was the better the ball situation. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it, but I didn't find much value in how that was going to translate to the court because, as this coach mentioned, it's not really like a human scale number. When I tell you, hey, you better the ball percentage was 35%, it's like, oh, what does that mean? How do I translate that to play? And, kind of backtracking on all of this, we got some data. So to answer this question, I was looking at some data. I took the Big Ten. That's the strongest women's collegiate volleyball conference right now. And I looked at a bunch of things. And I wasn't entirely surprised by this result because I've done similar things before and seen similar things before. So one thing that you'll notice is you have kill percentage, you have hitting efficiency. Okay, I'm even going to use this volumetrics hitting efficacy, I think is what they call it, where they're factoring in the zeros. They're all pretty much saying the same thing. So if you sort of rank the hitters in the Big Ten, to take all like the outsides and opposites for this, to all the outsides and opposites to over 300 attempts. I think I got them all. I had to do it manually. Volumetrics, I'm dying for you to release some sort of database. That would be glorious, but nevertheless, I can just do it manually. If you look at the correlation between, for example, kill percentage and efficiency, it's 0.84. If you look at the correlation between kill percentage and efficacy, it's 0.85. If you look at the correlation between efficiency and efficacy, it's 0.88. So pretty much when you rank hitters by kill percentage, you're pretty much ranking them by hitting efficiency. And you're pretty much ranking them by efficacy and vice versa. There's not a ton of difference there. There's some. I think that this notion that you're going to have two hitters who have a 50% kill percentage, but one of them is going to be 30% error and one of them is going to be 10% error, that doesn't really exist so much. I'm just sorting a little bit of data here. If you look at the hitters who are tops in kill percentage, you got Garrell from Penn State, you got Duello and Haggerty from Wisconsin, you got Sweet and Son from Nebraska, you got Parker from Penn State. Those are all among the highest efficiency hitters. The only other top efficiency hitter who's a bit lower who's ninth in kill percentage is Alexis Hart from Minnesota, and that was one of the things that this coach mentioned, a team that had a little bit more of a low error percentage. Okay, so you do see Hart there being a little, for Minnesota there being a little lower, maybe a less aggressive hitter who is still among the tops in hitting efficiency. One thing that's interesting is if you kind of just sort of start breaking it down and try to look more, and these stats are overall volumetrics, to my knowledge, you could determine efficiency in system versus out of system. I'd have to run reports on all the different ones and be too time consuming. So I think that overall is going to be a decent proxy for out of system as well. If you look at like hitters who are high in terminal outcomes, so that's sort of something that I'm interested in. Okay, you have broadly, if two hitters are going to get to 200, does one hitter get there by, say, 38% kill and 18% blocked and errors? And does another hitter get there by 34% kill, 14% blocked and errors? It's like you're usually not going to see like that much of a difference. Like I said, you're not going to see a hitter have 50% kill percentage and 30% blocked and errors. You don't see that in NCAA volleyball. Generally speaking, higher kill percentage is going to be higher efficiency, but you got a little bit of variability. So we're breaking it down. What's interesting is that terminal outcomes, like if you're high in terminal outcomes, those being high in terminal outcomes correlates positively to efficiency, efficacy, outcome, that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, like hitters who are low in terminal outcomes, because the biggest terminal outcome is getting a kill. And there's a little bit of a sampler bias because hitters who can't hit the ball in the court at all, like they don't get scholarships to play in the Big Ten. And if somehow they get on a Big Ten roster, they don't get on the court. So in terms of like high school volleyball, this might have a little less applicability because you have hitters who are very terminal in high school because they hit every ball in the net. Okay, so those players get kind of weeded out. But we're talking about among players who are like in the ballpark of relative effectiveness, like even some of the weaker hitters in the Big Ten are still, they're closer to the best hitters in the Big Ten than they are closer to the average volleyball player, for example. So there seems to be value in being a terminal outcome hitter. It's correlated positively with an increased efficacy. Another thing that I looked about was like an efficiency-efficacy gap, because efficacy is this volumetrics efficacy stat is trying to measure kind of like the zeros, the continues, how effective you were there. And if you're and generally speaking, getting dug is negative, like for the most part. So in general, hitters that had higher terminal outcomes had a lower efficiency efficacy gap, which I'm representing as being like that efficiency efficacy gap means like, given how good you are in general, like how productive are your continues. So being an aggressive terminal outcome hitter actually meant that your zeros tended to be better too, which if you think about it, like kind of makes sense. If you're going out there swinging for the fences, like your digs, that when they dig you, it's going to be less controlled. You'll have more deflections off blocks. You're going to have more kind of stuff like that. Maybe you'll have more soft blocks, more recycles, because you're swinging and hitting off the block, and those are more productive continues than getting dug, things like that. So, those are a couple of things that I think are worth looking at. And, I think from a broad perspective, it's pretty good to be a terminal outcome hitter. So I think you in a vacuum, if you're going to have a hitter hit 200, you'd rather have them be closer to 40% kill and hit 200 than closer to 33% kill and hit 200. So I think that there is some statistical validity for being more of a terminal outcome hitter, being a little bit more aggressive. Now, Minnesota's having some success, not necessarily doing that. And some other programs are having some success being a little bit more conservative in winning those rallies in transition. So I'm not saying you can't do it, but I think just like as an overall ballpark, it's something to consider that being a terminal outcome hitter is relatively valuable. I think it's also worth considering what percentage of your continues hit the opposing block. Generally speaking, being blocked is actually, like, when I say being blocked, I should say your attack being touched by the opposing block is generally a positive outcome actually for a hitter. If you look at the hitting efficiency out of system, it's in many cases, now, I haven't done every hitter, every league, et cetera, but for example, in USA, out of system balls that the opponent block touched in any fashion, stuff block, if you kind of added them all up, was a higher efficiency than balls out of system that were not touched by the opponent block. And of course, you got a little sampling bias there because there's going to be really out of system bad sets that the opponent block is going to pull, and we're just kind of rolling it in. Generally, I tried to not mark those often didn't mark those as attempts actually, and to put them as free balls. But there is some sampling bias there because balls that cannot be touched by the block at all, like, generally don't have a high chance of scoring. But I think that there's some indication that attacking the block is a pretty good ballpark. So to sort of maybe put the pin on it and how I would try to answer this question, because I think I dove into some of maybe like the wonkier ideas. If you're looking at kill percentage, efficiency, efficacy, you're looking at the percentage of terminal outcomes that your hitters have. Are they high terminal outcomes? Are they low? Looking at some of those different things. That's pretty wonky for our players, and probably not stuff that we want to get into too much with the players. We want to give them actionable information. I think the way that, at least right now, I would present it is we want to have as high kill percentage as possible in system or out of system. We want to have as high kill percentage as possible. And for sure, out of system, we want to be blocked more than we hit out. More forced errors, more blocks than unforced errors, hitting out or hitting in the net. I think those are I think they go nicely hand in hand. Because I think just saying like, attack the block, well, okay, great. I went out and attacked the block. I got blocked a lot. I still hit some balls out, and my kill percentage went down. Well, that's not good. So I'd like my kill percentage to go up. And then if I can do that in an aggressive manner, which means that the opposing block is getting me a lot. I don't know. I like that combination. And I like that idea that if you are tipping, you're tipping to kill more often. You're tipping to try to produce a kill than you're producing a ball that's going to get dug. I think that this is one of those, in this whole conversation makes me think a little bit of baseball. Never played baseball, but if you're a stat nerd, especially like 20 years ago, when I was a kid, 20 or even in the 90s, baseball was the place to be for, advanced statistics. Baseball was far ahead of other sports, just the nature of baseball, the statistical end of it. They talk about 3 true outcome hitters. So I'm talking about like terminal outcome volleyball spikers, kill, block, error. And batters in baseball, they call 3 outcomes: home run, strikeout, walk. The idea that these are the 3 outcomes that, batters have the most. And there was a heavy bias against these in like 60s and 70s. That was like the era, 60s, 70s, 80s. That was the era where like high batting average, stealing bases, bunting, all of these things were considered like these really positive things. And striking out was bad, contact on the bat was good, et cetera, et cetera. And when you see starting a little bit in the 90s and definitely getting into the 2000s, you see the rise of like the 3 true outcome batters. You have somebody like Barry Bonds, and it's like never hit singles. He'd have some strikeouts, he'd get walked a ton, and then he'd hit a lot of home runs. Mark McGwire, guys like that who were power hitters who struck out a fair amount and also took a lot of walks because they were really selective. And that meant sometimes they struck out looking, which was like you did not strike out looking in the 70s. Baseball game kind of evolved there. And, of course, it's a kind of counter pendulum. Okay, that type of batter maybe at some point gets overvalued. And then you have your scrappy guy who knows how to steal a base and bunt a hitter over. Okay, well, maybe there's some opportunity for value there. But as I relate that to volleyball, I think at times the notion of like a smart hit gets overvalued a little bit. I think just in general, we tend to, when we know a lot about something, and theoretically if we're coaches and we're trying to know a lot about volleyball, at least that's our goal, that play where the hitter's not in a great spot and they like tip the opposing outside hitter down and we get a weak attack back that we're able to kill in transition. That play like really stands out so much to us. Wow, it's such a smart play because we latch onto it in a little bit. I'm not saying it in a negative way, but like, okay, your casual volleyball person is not going to notice that. You're just going to notice that your hitter got dug and then you ended up getting a kill later. And like, I think us as like smart volleyball coaches, we like connect that, right? Oh, okay, that play in the rally that led to a later kill. And we get really excited about that. We want to teach our hitters about that because it's also like, like that's kind of the team aspect of volleyball. Okay, oh, you had that smart play earlier in the rally and that led to us being able to get a kill later, but we don't want to overemphasize that. When you get set, the best thing that you can do is kill the ball. And a lot of times killing the ball requires you to be aggressive. Now that doesn't mean that you can't tip aggressively. I think that there's definitely players who are aggressive tippers. And that might mean that your tip gets blocked every now and then. Because if you're really tipping that ball up and well over the block, well, yeah, you're not going to get blocked on the tip, but a better chance that they're going to pick it up. But that more aggressive tip, that more of like that no-look tip, some of that kind of stuff, well, maybe that's something that might end up going down. But it also might be something that gets swatted down once every 10, 12 times that you do it. And I think that might be okay. So kind of to put a pin in it at the human scale, this is kind of a big concept. And maybe some of you have heard me talk about it. It's like we want to put our stats in human scale, things that are maybe like more easy for our players to understand. Rather, like I don't really like to use hitting efficiency, hitting percentage. I don't really use that with players. 268, 241, 257. What does that mean? At the end of the day, the hitter just sort of looks to see if their number was high enough or not. Kill percentage is getting there a little bit more because it's easy to translate. 40% kill percentage. If you're in the Big Ten and you can kill 40% of your balls as an outside hitter, you're doing really well. 2 out of 5. That's a human scale number. If you can't kill the ball 33%, 1 out of 3. If you can't kill it 1 out of 3 times, you probably shouldn't be getting on the court in the Big Ten. I mean, there's a few hitters who are at that numbers and stuff like that. Okay, and stuff like that, but you're not going to be one of the more productive hitters in the Big Ten. You can't kill it 1 out of 3 times. So there you go. 2 out of 5, you're one of the best. 1 out of 3, you're risking somebody else getting your spot. So I like those are human scale numbers. So the idea is, okay, can we drive up our kill percentage? And while we're doing that, we should get blocked more than we make unforced errors, because that shows us, to me, the difference between aggressive, attacking in such a way that the other team's block has to do something, versus wild and reckless, hitting the ball way out, hitting the ball in the net, stuff like that. So that's my suggestion. And let me know what you think. Yep. Joe.Trinzy@gmail.com, @Volleycast on Twitter or Instagram. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know if you have if any of you out there have ways that you'd like to evaluate out of system hitting. How do you kind of define some of those things? What's your philosophy? Do you like to be more aggressive? Do you like to have a more make it play? Love to hear of anybody who has maybe a statistical defense or otherwise for more of a make it play philosophy. I'd like to kind of maybe hear a counterbalance if anybody has it. Be happy to talk to you, or if you just want to shoot me an email, I'll have to share on my podcast. Until then, take care, everyone.